So first things first, we need to go back to our center point. And so you can see here we got a center point defined that we were using before for our collision object and for our splash. So if we look at it here, you can see that point in our viewport. And so let's just view all of the people. And so if we watch this, we can see they both shoot their beams. And I want it so that around frame 50 or so is where the shockwave occurs. So what I need to do is we're just going to go back to this spot. I want to do something on this side. It's getting a little bit too cluttered. I don't want to go too far out in this network on the left, so I'm going to go back to the right. So I'm just going to make another null just to get this over here. So we'll just call it out shockwave point. And so now that we have that point, all we really need is a sphere that expands really quickly. So we can do copy to points. And then here we are going to go back to polygons. I'll make this something like 75. It's gonna grow and we're gonna want all this resolution. So let's go back and be able to view this here. Okay, so let's say we want this to start on 1050, which means we'll go back to 1049, and so then this will be 0, and so we want this to blow up and fire off relatively quickly, and then I think slow down. Not a whole lot. It's going to dissipate as it shoots out. But I think, let's see, if it goes from 1050 to 1065, I'd say, so that's a bit more, or a bit less than a second of this to shoot out. So we'll do something like, let's see what this looks like. I'd say let's make it go, we'll make it go pretty big. Let's do 7.25. And I still think I want a bit more resolution on this, so let's do something like that. So that's looking good. It's going to take a little bit to flipbook something like this, but I think it is important. Let me just make sure this isn't rendering anything. Okay. So again, like I was saying, I don't want this to shoot out. I don't need an S-curve with the animation for these keys. I want something that's more of a, I'll show you. So this is an S-curve. I want it more like that so that it shoots out really quickly and then slows down a bit. I don't have to go too crazy with these curve editing, but I feel like that's probably close to what I want. But we'll try flipbook and see what happens. Okay, I've got the flipbook. Let's see what happens. Yep, shoots out pretty quickly, slows down as it dissipates. I'd say we can work with that. Okay. So a few things that we need to do now is that it needs normals. And we're going to do a trail. So we want the velocity of this. I don't need to create it myself. Since it is being animated, I can do compute velocity. And we can see here now, if we go inside this, these should be, yeah. And we got normals, cool. And the next thing that we want to do is we want to give this some noise. So we're going to do the same old stuff. Going to go into a point vault. And we're going to give some turbulent noise, and we're going to put this in color. And we need a fit. We're going to change this to simplex. We're going to promote these parameters. We're going to go back to here and make sure that we can use our source min so that we can change the values that we have here, kind of erode them in a bit. And we'll be doing that as this animates. And then we want some noise on the sphere itself, so we're gonna create some more turbulent noise. Create an add. Make sure that in our turbulence noise we're using 3D noise. We don't want alligator, we want simplex again. And we're going to promote these as well. So one of the things that we're going to do is we can see that we're going to need to offset our color, something like that. We'll probably have to change our frequency. It is a bit too rough, too large. There we go. Something like that. Reduce the roughness a bit. We just need to change the shape up a bit. But one of the things that we can see is happening right now is this sphere is intersecting with the ground. And so when this explodes, I want to be able to have something along the edge as this expands out, which means that we need to per frame Boolean this. And for that, I will need this ground, which luckily I already have set up. So what we'll do is we'll create Boolean, which is, they redid it semi-recently. I can't remember if it was 17 or 17.5, but it is greatly improved and infinitely more useful. So now if I click this or connect that into ground collide, I'll just make a thing like that. We can see that this is giving us the bottom. We don't want that, so we are going to do subtract, and that's giving us this cutout here, and that's good. But what we're going to need for later is we don't want this geo here at the bottom. Luckily we have control over that. We can select where this intersection happens and get rid of the geo that it creates. So I believe it is B inside A in this instance. It'll just create a group for that. It's not going to do anything unless we do something with that information. So we can do a blast. And we can select B inside A. And now if we look up, now we just have this sphere as is. So that looks good. I think another thing we might have to do is we're gonna have to transfer some color to the bottom of it. And in order to do that, we're just going to create a color. Make sure that that is all white. And we're going to do an attribute transfer. And make sure that the distance is way low. Do something like that. So that's looking cool. Increase the sample. And we'll change the blend width a little bit. Something like that. And then we can reduce that distance a bit. I think we also might... I'm going to see what happens if I subdivide this so that we get more resolution from the ground. Yeah. Doesn't seem like it makes it too much more expensive to compute. And gives us a better result for the ground. So that looks good. So next we are going to scatter according to color. So scatter. Go to density attribute, make it look for color. And then we're gonna increase, we're gonna get rid of max points for now. I don't know exactly how many we need. Let's just start with like 300,000. And yeah, that looks probably about as much as we need. I'm going to turn off relax iterations. That always increases the computation time of these scatters. But now that I've done that, I think I need more. So let's try 500,000. Doesn't seem to have changed too much. Let's try a million. Yeah, I'd say that'll work. Cool. So what we're gonna do now is we gotta animate this. So this starts on frame 50. And let's just make the amplitude higher so that we can see what we're doing. And then as this fans out, we're going to have to change this minimum value here. And we don't really need to change it till close to the end. So let's say if it goes to 65, we'll start it at, let's do 58. Okay, so we'll make a key there, and then by 65 we are going to erode it into nothing. We'll still have the bottom edge, and it looks like it's hitting down here, which is interesting. I guess, okay, that does make sense. It will intersect through the ground. But since I don't really feel like extending this down any farther, I am going to just write a point wrangle. And this is sort of cheating, but this is the type of stuff you have to do all the time. Just little workarounds to make your life a bit easier. So I'm going to say if the position of this sphere is lower than, so the y-axis is less than something. So I don't know what value I need yet, so I'm just gonna do height remove point 0 pt num. So it defaults to 0, so we can see here that 0 doesn't quite work for us, but that's okay, because now I can just click and drag that down, and now I know if I go too far, it'll bring back that bottom part of the sphere, but I'll keep it somewhere like that. So now nothing below this surface is going to exist, so then now when I scatter things, it's only going to be up here. So I think another thing I will probably want to do is I want to get rid of these at a certain point. Otherwise it's just going to sit there. I can just say after a certain frame, go away. So again, going to make another point wrangle. And again, I have this up here above the scatter because I could put this below it and it'll get the same thing done. The only problem is it's going to calculate all the points beneath that on top of all the other stuff that it's doing with the Boolean, and I don't want to add to the computation, so I don't want this to evaluate the points to scatter and then remove points from that. I just want to remove things so that the scatter never has to scatter onto those points to begin with. So I'm going to keep this function, or this vex up here, then scatter, then I'm going to create another thing that says if frame is greater than 1065, remove point 0 pt num. And now if I go greater than 1065, it's gone. Excellent. Alright, so let's just take a look at a flipbook of this, see how this is playing out so far. So let's give it a go. Okay, flipbook should be good to go. Let's take a look. Okay, so doing mostly what I would expect it to do. The only thing that might not be working is I think it needs to fade out maybe a bit sooner. So I'm going to go up to the point VOP, and where we have these keys, I'm going to slide this over a couple more frames. Nothing crazy. And now I think what we're going to do is we're going to do what we did down here. We're just going to create a new billowy just to say what I did again. If you go to and type in billowy, it'll do pyro configure billowy smoke. But again, this only gives you an example, so you have to edit this yourself. So we're going to plug this in, and then here where it's volume scatter, we're going to keep input. We don't really need to add noise because it's already based off of noise, so you can just delete that. And then for rasterize, let's see what this looks like. Should probably work. So I'm going to probably do where it says velocity blur. We can see on these points there should be, yeah, so we do have velocity. And so now if we do something like add velocity blur in our rasterization, it should give us enough volume to combat stepping. That's one of the main things, is when things move really fast, it gives you sort of a stepping look, unless you add subframes or do something to increase the geo or emission object to take into account the subframes. And this looks like, if I turn this off, what happens? Yep. So this pushes it outward a bit, which should help. And I'm just gonna keep most of the default stuff and just kind of see what happens. But before I do, we gotta make sure this starts at 10. We'll do 1049 just to be safe. I'm gonna change the voxel size. Solving, again, we want the shape to have shredding and turbulence. And for buoyancy, we don't need it. Everything else I think looks okay. I don't think we need to add the ground as a collision source. It doesn't penetrate into the ground at all, so I think it should be okay. If it's not, it's an easy thing to add back in. So I am going to view this. Let's get a null under there. And I'm going to flipbook it. So let's see what this looks like. So I let the flipbook go a little bit, and I can see a few things off the bat that I don't think are going to work. One is that my time scale is very low, so I'm going to actually kick this up to something like 2.5. And then another thing is that my shape, my dissipation is also way too slow, so I need it to dissipate pretty quickly. So I'm going to kick this up to 0.4, let's say, for now. I'm going to increase the disturbance and shredding of this just for fun. We'll see what that looks like. So I'm going to give this another go and see what happens. I'm going to change in the setup, the voxel size. It was at 0.02, I believe. And I put it to 0.01. I'm going to put it back to 0.02 just because it was taking a pretty long time. So I want to be able to iterate on this a bit. So let's see what happens here. So I've got myself a flipbook. And if we take a look, that's looking cool. I think I do need to lower the dissipation so that it lasts a little bit longer, and I might change the time scale, lower that a little bit as well. But otherwise, I think once this is actually rendered out, it'll look pretty cool. So I'm just gonna make those quick changes, and then we'll roll from there. So yeah, if I go and so yeah, dissipation, I was at 0.05, put it to 4. I'm gonna make it 275. Simulation time scale, I'm gonna make this 2. So I'm gonna save, and I'm gonna do another flipbook. Alright, so I tried that flipbook and it rammed out basically. So I'm gonna have to lower some settings here. I had set that to 0.02. I had crashed at one point and I had to reopen everything, and I think I forgot to change the voxel size here. I'm gonna change this actually to 0.03. I'm gonna go back to solving. Time scale is gonna be 2.25. Shape, dissipation, I'm gonna set to 325. So it shouldn't really last for too long. With the change in voxel size, I think that'll make it so that my computer can actually handle it, because at 128 gigs of RAM, I still bombed. So let's see how this goes. Okay, I've got a new flipbook. I'm gonna run this. It doesn't look too terribly different from the original one that we had. It might linger a little bit more inside here, but I think that's really all that we need. Again, this is just a shockwave that happens, a flourish to the main effect. So it doesn't need to be too fancy. And a lot of times an effect like this would be used more for distortion on the plate. But since we don't really have a plate, we're working 100% CG. I think it'll just be a cool looking volume to blast out. So I think I am going to write another file cache. And then we'll make this shockwave. And then this needs to be written out from 1049. And I think it only goes until about 10, let's do 1070 just to be safe. And then again, we'll go to load from file, make sure that we have no geometry, load from disk. And then I'm going to write this out. Okay, so this is written out now. If I scrub, should be there. Okay. I'm going to do out shockwave object merge. Cut this. I don't want to see any of this. Make a new geo. This will be center. Shockwave. Cool. So now we can go into out. Go to our hero beam. Shockwave. Go into manual. And let's see what this shockwave looks like. So we can see here, what's interesting is that the shockwave is picking up the lighting information from the beams, which I think is great. It might look a little bit low res, but since it's being motion blurred as it's being emitted, it's probably not much of an issue. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to render an mplay for, I don't know, 10, 15 frames, get a good idea of how this is looking in motion. And then from there, we're just going to take this lighting and we're going to apply this to the characters, and then we have ourselves an effect. So let's see how this looks. So I did render the 10 frames, and I didn't really think it looked as good as it should. So there are a few changes that I made to the Pyro Solver. One of the things is I took the time scale down to 2. I think it was dissipating a bit too quickly. And so that way I turned it to 0.1 dissipation. I upped the minimum and maximum substeps to 2. It was moving quick enough that I think it needed more subframe information as it traveled to give more detail in the shape of the pyro. It's the smoke. And then I increased the disturbance, reduced the shredding to 0.1, and increased the turbulence. I also made sure in my sourcing that in my field that I'm importing, I have the vector field of velocity and target field of I have the source volume of V, which then in DOPS gets funneled into the velocity field. So doing that, I then ran out a new flipbook, and I'll just give you a quick peek at what the flipbook looks like. So if we watch this, you can see there's just a bit more going on. It's a bit more dynamic. It looks a little chunky in the viewport, but that's fine. In the render, it looks a lot better. And another thing that I did is in my file cache, I extended the frame range, so instead of it ending at, I believe it was 1070, I just gave it another 5 frames so that it had enough time to cache out and dissipate. So we'll take a quick look at a render too. Let's find a good frame. Let's say 1053. I think that looks pretty cool. Okay, so now I've got a render here, and while it looks semi-unimpressive as is, if we look at the alpha, it looks a lot more interesting than the previous version. We might be able to play with it a little bit if we drop a pyro post-process. And then we can just increase the density. Let's try 3. So at 3, the alpha is definitely a lot thicker. I think this is catching a bit more light from the geo lights that we have in here. So I think I am going to stick with this. And to move on, we're going to do a couple more things. One thing that I noticed before is that I have this starting at 1050. Another thing that needs to start at 1050 that isn't currently is our splash. Our splash starts at frame 1044, but the splash should happen around the same time as the shockwave, so I'm just going to have to re-sim this and do it and start it at 1050. So I'm just going to run that through. It's not super important. Everything moves pretty quickly, so the difference of 6 frames isn't going to make or break your effect, but some people might notice, so it's always good to get everything as in sync as possible. So that's what I'm going to do here. So I'm going to run this out.